Module 6, Union Impact on Compensation. Organized labor has a long history in the United States. Now, there are some people that absolutely love unions and think that they're best for workers, and then there's other people who feel that unions are the reasons that we have a lot of our lost industry in the United States. Wherever you lie, you do have to realize that the organized labor movement is responsible for the working conditions that we enjoy today. There's a long history of people taking a stand to stand up against the employers to change the working conditions for themselves and for others to come. In our history, especially right with the dawning of the Industrial Revolution, the working conditions were deplorable. We saw many tragedies. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire is a very famous fire in a clothing mill in New York City. Over 150 young women died in this fire, and it was a standard practice in that day for the employers to lock the workers into the buildings, because of course if you think of a 5-10-story building in New York City in the turn of the century, summertime, very hot, very dreadful working conditions. They would work for hours on end. 15 hours a day would be a normal occurrence, and in this case all the doors were locked. A fire broke out on the floor, and these poor girls were trapped. Many jumped to their death, and it was a big eye-opener for the safety and working conditions around the country. So organized labor did help bring about the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, and because of that we now enjoy the 40-hour work week and overtime rules if you work more than 40 hours and are a non-exempt employee. Traditionally, the organized labor has set standards for the wage rates and even compensation benefit plans that you have seen, whether they're union or non-union. They sort of set the pace going forward. And a lot of times we see a wage gap between union and non-union, and the size of that gap will vary over time depending on how the economy is rolling. Now, one thing that we do see is called a spillover effect, and that's really the non-union employers looking for ways to keep their employees from organizing. And one way that they do that is they see the competition that is a unionized shop, and what they do is they mimic their compensation packages to, in effect, keep their employees happy and keeping them from unionizing. And of course, then the employer would have to deal with the union rather than just set his own wages. And a large reason why we would see this spillover effect in a non-union environment is because of the employers do not want one of these, a collective bargaining agreement or a CBA, and that is the actual contract between the union workers and the organization to really set the parameters of the work. And this sets everything from the wages, the overtime rules, benefits. We've already talked about the benefit packages are 30 to 40% greater than in a non-union environment. But what we're seeing in today's market is competition that is out there for non-union worker and overseas is affecting the sustainability of these extreme compensation and benefit packages. And I have an example. Now, my grandfather was a steel worker. You may have heard of Bethlehem Steel. And in the 60s and 70s, when he was actively working there, as a union employee, he earned 3 months vacation a year. Now imagine we were just talking about in our last module having to deal with a $15 minimum wage. How would you like to also, in addition to that, have to pay each of your employees for 3 months of no work? Think about how that would affect your bottom line. These are some of the extreme compensation benefit packages that have affected the U.S. economy over the years. So now with competition of many non-unionized organizations within the United States and then competition from overseas, we're seeing that now these collective bargaining agreements are having to be modified to really be sustainable, because as we saw with the $15 minimum wage, if you can, there's a tipping point where you are going to price out the employer and the business will not be able to sustain. Over time, due to the increased non-union work environment and also competition from overseas, we're seeing that the CBAs are now starting to introduce alternative reward systems. And this type of pay system is not traditionally something unions strive for. They prefer a more egalitarian pay system where people are paid the same pay for the same work. But this is an attempt to control wages in a very competitive environment. So we see two different columns here. So some of the awards are known and they're very easily entered into a CBA: lump sums, ESOPs, pay for knowledge. These are all rewards that it is easy to see in advance what the reward is going to be. And then on the other side, we have the unknown awards, and these are really dependent upon how well the organization does. They're a little bit unknown, and these are the type of things that traditionally unions don't care for, but it is the nature of the current environment that we're in. To wrap up this unit, it's important to understand that the relationship between the employee and the employer in a unionized environment has always been a balancing act. In the very, very early years of this country and in Europe during the Industrial Revolution, the employer was favored in this balancing act. They had all the power, and the people said no. We cannot live with these conditions. We cannot live with these wages. And they fought for many years, and they fought hard. And then the balancing act was in the employee's favor. But now bring us into the current times, and we see that there are a lot of competition, things affecting the compensation systems that we have seen over the years with the unions. And now we're seeing a more level balancing act between the employee and the employer with having to do with compensation and benefits. And we'll see where it goes in the next several years.